Hello, I am Miss Rebecca Trent, and you are listening to the Bow Street Society podcast.
Hello and welcome to March's episode of the Bow Street Society podcast. I'm TG Campbell, author of the Bow Street Society mystery books and casebook collections. I'm usually joined by my co-host Richard A. Boxshall, but as it's International Women's Month, I've sent him back to 1896 to buy some more soap. And whilst he's gone, I have a very special guest co-host in the form of Sabrina Poole. So hello and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, I'm very excited.
Now, you've played the Society's clerk, Miss Rebecca Trent, in both the live-action trailer for The Case of the Curious Client and her character interview on a previous episode of this podcast. You've also voiced Dr. Lynette Locke for her joint character interview with her husband Percy. But what actually attracted you to the role of Miss Trent originally?
So, I think having a woman that's a bit sassy, is a bit strong, knows her own mind, and is in a position where she's in control is what I love. I love playing those characters. And when I read the audition material, and the sass that she gives.
Yeah.
Just strong. She knows her own mind. She knows where she is, and she knows her own strength. And I was like, I need to play this character.
Yeah, because she has to be like that, doesn't she? Especially she has to deal with people like Dr. Percy Weeks and like a lot of the men.
Yeah, she has to deal with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
She drives most of us crazy, but she just takes it in a stride and just carries on with her job and does it pretty damn well, I would like to say.
Yeah, I know. Also, when we did the audition for the original trailer, also part of the reasons why I wanted to do it is because you'd never done like a period sort of piece before, had you? So you were like, I want to wear the costume.
I have been dying to wear a historical dress for so long, and the only person I know who does historical stuff is myself. I direct historical plays. I'm never in them. So when we went to the costume store, and it was like, just try on all these dresses and the skirts, and I remember I had a hoop hanging underneath, and trying to get like right through the doors, and I kept like knocking into a table, but I loved it.
Yeah, and sitting down was a bit of an issue as well, wasn't it?
We had to work on that one a bit.
Yeah. So Miss Trent is often described as formidable, as she manages society members, as I say, and keeps the top makers like Dr. Weeks in line. But how important do you think it is to have sort of depictions of strong women like Miss Trent in books and films, etc.?
I think it's essential, personally. The thing is, like, a strong woman can be many, many different things, and it's important that we have women who are strong in different ways. But certainly it's not so bad now. We've still got a little way to go, but certainly 20, 30 years ago, you'd get the women who are the romantic leads and the nurses and the mothers, and they're really not a good representation of the variety of we still need those characters, but we need a breadth and a variety of women and types of women, good and bad, and women who are strong and who know their own mind and who are not afraid to speak up and who are prepared to deal with the consequences of that and stay on their track and speak their truth is something that is invaluable, and it's priceless for the younger, well, actually no, not just the younger women, for all women of any age to see that and to know that that's an option for them.
Yeah, I think that was important, especially sort of writing in the period that I do, sort of the 1890s, to actually show the more stronger women, the more independent women, and the roles that independent women were open to them, even though they were still quite restricted. I think it is important to also have that other side of women in that era.
Yeah,
sort of through characters like Miss Trent,
particularly with historical fiction, historical plays, and historical films. You get this overwhelming sort of narrative that women were quiet and subservient, and because they couldn't do very much, they didn't do very much, which is entirely wrong. It's completely wrong. Women did do what they could. They pushed the boundaries. They were strong. It just so happens that because men tended to write those stories, that they'd left them bits out because they didn't want us to know about those. But even going back, I mean, I did a play about Boudica, going back pre-Roman, and we had people in Roman times and Greek times who were intelligent, strong, outspoken women who did their thing.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't forget about them, and we should tell their stories and prove that they did exist.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So could you tell us a bit about yourself away from playing Miss Trent?
So I am very much into the theatre world, as you probably all know. I celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the first play I directed, November just gone. And I've got another couple that I'm directing this year. I act as well. I mentioned Boudica, but I've done lots of different things there. I sometimes do a little bit of extra work,
cool.
which is quite fun. So I've met a couple of famous faces. I do a bit of writing, a bit of stage management, a bit of tech. I'm really interested in fight work, so I've done a couple of fight courses, which is amazing.
I've seen some pictures we put on Instagram of you doing those sort of stage combat courses. Yeah, it looks really fun.
That's another thing I think we need to see more of, is women fighting. And unfortunately, really, like, fantasy is the main genre for that. Just because women, as strong as they were, didn't tend to actively participate in wars. But we definitely need more women waving swords around, because we love it. And shooting guns, it's great.
Yeah.
But most of my time is taken up with my own theatre company, which is called Hard Nosed Cow, and we have a very definite approach to improving the sort of the representation of women and putting women in positions of power, and also to debate how women are represented, not just in the good ways, but also in the bad ways. So the next show that we have, this is exclusive, by the way, nobody else knows it.
Oh,
exclusive little intro for you. The next show that we're working on is going to be a one-woman show, which I'm gonna act in, and I'm writing at the moment, and it's all about female violence and why a woman would be violent and how the world looks at that and what her options are around that. I can't say very more because I don't want to spoil it. And I've only written half of it so far. Okay. It's going to be coming in sort of October, November time. So yeah, that's what I do. I do a bit of everything, and then I'm at the gym the rest of the time.
Yeah. Because you're also helping me to sort of work on the audio book as well at the moment, aren't you, for The Curious Client?
I am, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah. So yeah, you literally are just a bit of a master of all trades, really, aren't you?
I like to have my fingers in many pies. I like to know how stuff works. I've actually just finished. I was the tech lead on a production of The Father that's on at the Sorbonne right at this moment. So I just finished rigging all the lights and programming it all, and I'm straight off onto another one at the same theatre, Orca, which is a beautiful, beautiful play. Again, surrounding women and young girls. Really good play by a guy called Matt Grinter, and that's on in June. So it never stops.
Well, it's good though. It's good to be busy, and it's good to have the bite, isn't it?
It is. It's good to just keep going.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Well, I think that was really interesting. I know a lot of people are really interested in you as an actor. Obviously, they know that you as the face of Miss Trent. This is Rebecca, and the voice of Miss Rebecca Trent as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
I love Rebecca Trent. Everyone loves Rebecca Trent because she's
apart from the police.
But yeah, apart from the police, but they're wrong.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Vicky Pipe from Bow Street Police Museum, and you're listening to the Bow Street Society podcast.
We are now joined by two very special guests. One is an old friend of ours who was here right at the very beginning of the podcast, manager of the Bow Street Police Museum, Vicky Pipe. Hi, Vicky. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, thanks for having me again. It's great to be back. Thank you.
It's great to have you back. And the other is a new friend of ours, best-selling crime fiction writer and author of the award-winning Smart Women's Mystery series, Victoria Dowd. I first met Victoria on a writers panel for the UK Crime Book Club, where we had loads of fun talking about all things crime fiction. So I'm delighted to have her here with us today. Hi, Victoria. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this. Thank you.
You're welcome. So first of all, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourselves and your work? Just starting with Vicky.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, so I am the manager of the newly opened. I'm not sure I can still say that because it's been about 9 months now. We opened in May of last year, but we are the Bow Street Police Museum. We're located on the site of the 1881 Bow Street Police Station. We tell the story of Bow Street's connection to policing. So the early history that predates the building that we're in, the establishment of the Bow Street Runners, all the way up until this building itself officially closed in 92. That was on the police station side, whereas the court, the attached magistrates court next door, was in operation till 2006. So we cover sort of that entire history. It's quite a few years. And we're looking at not just the evolution of kind of policing in this area, as well as the sort of what was happening on the court side of things, but we're also really interested to look at the kind of social history of Covent Garden. So look at how communities in Covent Garden were affected by this change in policing, affected by changes in the law, how law and order impacted the ordinary everyday lives of people in Covent Garden.
Yeah, I've been to the museum. It's absolutely fantastic. So if you can get down there, it's really good. They also do some really good walking tours as well. So I went on the of Molly's a Mentor, which was really informative. So if you can get down there to do that, it'd be really great.
Thank you.
So, Victoria?
Hi, yes, I'm the author of the Smart Woman's Mystery series. Before that, I was a criminal defence barrister, and my first case was, in fact, at Bow Street Magistrates Court. So I'm sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, and it's closed now. I can't believe it. Oh,
that's incredible. Victoria, you're going to have to come down. And,
I will. I'd love to.
Yeah.
My goodness. So, yeah, I haven't been a barrister for a while, obviously, as you can tell, since all the courts have shut. But
I won't go there.
So now I write the Smart Woman's Mystery series, which is a series of books that are basically classic whodunits, but with a lot of kind of dark humour because they're more modern. So the first was the Smart Woman's Guide to Murder. The second was Body on the Island. And the third was the Supper Club Murders. And it basically follows this group of women who originally were in a book club together, but they really didn't get very much further than just reading Gone Girl and drinking lots of Prosecco all the time. And that kind of stopped being a book club after they were on the first sort of away day that went horribly wrong, where there were a lot of murders, obviously, and some members of the book club ceased to exist. But yeah, they are Ursula Smart, who is the sort of unreliable narrator, and her mother, Pandora, who she doesn't get on with particularly very well, and Charlotte, the godmother, is with them, Mirabelle, and the lovely Bridget, who has a kind of bizarre menagerie of pets that she takes around with her as well.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's a fourth one coming. That should be out at the end of April.
I know you're also sort of a big Agatha Christie fan as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I love, obviously, a fan of whodunits generally, but Agatha Christie, I am a bit of a fangirl. But and I write the Adapting Agatha series, which is basically looks at the adaptations of Agatha Christie's novels. And yeah, so that's on my website, victoriadowd.com.
And Vicky, what's the website for the Bow Street Museum?
Yes, it is. It's as straightforward as that. bowstreetpolicemuseum.org.uk.
Having a look on your website, Victoria. You mentioned about being from Yorkshire and liking Gothic. So how big were the Brontes for you?
Oh, massive, obviously, hugely. You know, and what is interesting about Jane Eyre, my favourite one, is how it carries with you through each period of your life. So when I was, young teenage girl discovering, I was like, oh my God, Mr. Rochester, I want to have Mr. Rochester. I am Jane Eyre. I am, Kathy on a hill. But then, as you get slightly older, you kind of realise, well, he's actually got his wife chained up upstairs and called her mad. And so that he can marry this young woman who he's, conned into walking up the aisle. So yeah, he's not quite the gentleman that we think he perhaps is. And that's what I love about the Brontes, that they're not just, you know, woman meets man and is elevated in status, and there's a darkness to them that's just so fabulous. You know, you've got Heathcliff is by no means a decent human being in any way, and they're actually quite violent and unkind to one another all the time. Very, very Yorkshire.
Oh, goodness. I don't know what to say about that.
From the past, obviously.
Yeah, I've got it from the past, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier in the show, March is International Women's Month, and International Women's Day itself was held on Tuesday the 8th. So to mark the occasion, I brought us all together here today to have a chat about the roles that women have played on both sides of the law throughout history. And I know it's a subject that fascinates me, and I'm sure it fascinates all of you as well. First of all, we just want to ask, so has there been any examples of men or women that you've come across in your research who is either on the right or wrong side of the law?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting with the museum sort of, I guess, straddling both kind of the policing side of thing and the court. We do encounter, people on sort of both sides, as you say, of right and wrong, but also sort of a slightly grey area. I think lots of people will know Bow Street at the court for some of the very big, significant cases over time. The Suffragettes spring to mind, obviously, instantly when you first sort of posed this question to me. And we highlight the case where Christabel and Emmeline Pankhurst and Flora Drummond appeared at Bow Street. They were issued a summons and stood in the dock on charges of inciting breaching the peace, because they'd been handing out leaflets in Trafalgar Square trying to urge other suffragettes, but members of the public, to sort of rush on Parliament to protest the right to vote. So they very famously stood in the dock here. And Christabel, as a trained lawyer, she became sort of almost accidentally, in this instance, the first trained female lawyer to cross-examine someone in court, just trying to act in her own defence here. And obviously there's the question around, technically what they were doing was seen as being against the law, but actually, you know, standing up for your rights and wanting to forge a better path for women to have equality and the right to vote. You know, can we sort of retrospectively see that as being sort of an illegal act? So a lot of the women that we come across when we're doing our research sort of tend to fall in that category, I think, because a lot of it is about, you know, trying to elevate women's status over time. And on the sort of flip side of that, if you look at women's role in policing, you know, women were involved in the police force as early as sort of the end of the 19th century, but they were sort of segregated from what men were typically doing in the police. So initially they were employed as matrons to look after any female offenders or children. During the First World War, that slightly changed because of a lack of men in policing, having gone across, involved in the fighting. But very few women were attested, were given the powers to arrest. And even when that changed again over time, women's roles were very different from men until the 1970s, which seems so recent, really. It's staggering to think that. And we have lots of visitors who come in when we explain that are really surprised that it was that late that, you know, women were then sort of, I'm going to say the word allowed, but the rules changed to mean that women could take on exactly the same roles and responsibilities as their male counterparts. But another part of that story is, even though that changed and that was very positive, the equipment they were given to do the same job was very different. So we have on display in the museum example of truncheons issued to women, which were smaller than the ones issued to their male colleagues, and they were meant to be carried in handbags. Women's uniforms didn't have pockets, so they couldn't sort of keep their beat books and their sort of report books and sort of be as practical as, you know, sort of their male counterparts. So again, it's sort of this constant sort of theme really of sort of women on both sides sort of trying to elevate their status and be seen as equal to men. And I guess you get into sort of a lot of, when you look historically at women being arrested, besides, you know, those like the suffragettes, where there's a more political aspect to it. Within this area in particular, in Covent Garden, you know, you get a lot of women who are arrested for soliciting, for prostitution, and kind of the connotations that brings. And hopefully over time, in the events and things that we're doing at the museum, we can really dig into that and have a little look at that and think about, well, again, the legality of that. But, you know, if you find yourself in that situation of being involved in the sex trade, kind of what is, you know, where is the line in terms of, is it a means to kind of sustain yourself if you're in a situation of great sort of poverty or destitution, but then that you're sort of being labelled as a criminal in that respect. So there's lots of tensions there, lots to unpick, lots of really complicated kind of situations. So I'm sorry, that's got quite deep quite quickly, but I was really excited when you posed that question, because it's something that we come up a lot when people kind of chat to us and ask, you know, well, you know, what kind of offences were people committing who were held here, or, you know, who was responsible for enforcing the law. It gets really, really complicated, but really sort of interesting to kind of dig into that, and particularly when you're looking at the roles of women.
Yeah, I think I heard somewhere that initially women officers didn't have the power to arrest. They had to go find a male counterpart to actually come and arrest the person they'd apprehended, which just is nuts. You think about that, I just think that's absolutely crazy. Yeah,
absolutely.
They say it's been living memory of the 1970s when they actually were able to sort of, as say, have more sort of matching sort of roles as men in the police. Yeah. Victoria?
That's so interesting what you were talking about with outfits and everything, and them being adapted, because I was in the first sort of year of women being allowed to wear trousers at the bar.
Gosh.
So before that, you had to always wear a skirt.
Wow.
And I, you know, was seen as absolutely, you know, she's wearing trousers again.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
You're sitting in a cell there. We would have to go down in the cells. You know, they're not particularly very salubrious areas. You know, you want to be practical. You've got to get up and down the stairs all the time, wearing, you know, fancy skirts and the robe and everything. And, you know, when you went for the fitting for the wig, there were no female wigs. Gosh. It was just, you can have a small men's one. And, you know, I'm not exactly that old, but so it's still kind of, it's still finding its way, I think, and to be entirely equal. But my memorable lady in my research, I've been researching more sort of in the 1920s and going back to the court cases then, for a new series that I'm writing, which is about a journalist in 1929, and it's still going to be, you know, the kind of classic whodunit sort of series. But I found this wonderful Lady Colin Campbell, who had a huge court case for her divorce, was infamous because she was basically almost forced to marry Lord Colin Campbell, though it wasn't, you know, a match made in heaven. And at the time, they clearly knew he had syphilis. And the wedding was put off repeatedly. But it was seen as a great match because she had wealth and he had the title. It wasn't a very nice marriage, I don't think. And she wanted to divorce him, but he did not want to divorce her. And so they had this huge court case, and her name was literally dragged through the mud, that she was this, you know, terrible woman who had loose morals. Whereas, you know, he'd been sleeping around with every prostitute on the street and had given her syphilis as well. And And it was famous as well for the fact that the butler at the house was spying on them all the time through the keyholes. And he devised a little tiny object where he could watch through keyholes. And it was called a mutoscope. And it's where the term "what the butler saw" came from.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Well, needless to say, she lost the case. She wasn't allowed to divorce him, had to remain married to him, and was shunned by all of society after that. But she was an incredibly intelligent, vivacious woman who decided, I'm going to become a journalist. I'm going to write. And she was very witty. She had a kind of lightning wit and got into a sort of more bohemian set of people, with artists such as Whistler painted her. And she lived this amazing life afterwards, where she just completely changed her whole persona and went off. And, you know, she was known for marvelous things like she would wear a live snake around her neck in summer when it was really hot because it kept her cool.
I love this woman.
It's just and she's absolutely famous beauty as well. If you get a chance to look at any pictures of her, the paintings of her in her youth, you know, she was statuesque, beautiful woman.
But generally, obviously, we sort of talk about always women sort of throughout history, and so it's very much sort of a theme of sort of obviously sort of bit of oppression and sort of women who have been convicted of crimes, sort of more sort of the victims of crimes themselves rather than actually being sort of the criminals. But do you think that generally there's a perception that women are incapable of violence, do you think, within society?
I think that's a really interesting question. It brings to mind the Dr. Crippen case, which is very well known. We mention it a little bit in the museum. And so Dr. Crippen stood in the dock, accused alongside his, I never know how to term his girlfriend. So the lady that he allegedly murdered his wife to be with. So it's Ethel Leneve. I think I've pronounced that correctly. And just if you compare that to sort of the same dock, you know, several, you know, not long before where the Suffragettes stood. So the Suffragettes are standing there sort of trying to say, no, we deserve to be treated equally to men and should have the same rights. But in the Crippen case, you know, Ethel used her status as a woman to say, how could I possibly have been involved in this? I'm just a woman. I'm incapable of kind of doing it. And that was sort of her defense in that instance. So, you know, and obviously subsequently research has gone in to suggest, well, perhaps she wasn't as innocent in that case as she made herself out to be. And I'm sure there are hundreds of similar cases where, women have been able to use that lack of equality to kind of put forward the sort of the status, well, I'm just a woman. I couldn't have possibly committed any crime. What would I know about doing things like that? I'm incapable.
Victoria, so what is your thoughts on that question? Do you think that women generally are sort of seen as sort of being incapable of committing sort of violence or being sort of evil, quotation marks? Do you think that's something that the society sort of carried with it to this day?
To some extent, I think to some extent, and especially in the past, maybe not so much nowadays, but so my pupil mistress's the first case I did with her, because my head of chambers was representing her, was Rose West. And that was definitely that kind of a case where, you know, you think Fred West is the murderer and somebody else has tagged along. And I think that's the same for cases where you see, you know, kind of the Myra Hindley case, and it's all very much this person was an add-on. But I think nowadays, the equality that you see, the cases that I was involved in, it was very much a case of, you know, they were equally capable of having done something and equally capable of having their own defence to that, but often would blame, you know, the other party in equal measure. I used to
First thing that I'm reading at the moment called The Warrior Queens, which is by Antonia Fraser. It's actually all about women that we perhaps don't know as much about, so sort of Catherine of Aragon and Isabella of Spain and all that. And it's interesting we talk about violence because there's a whole section about women in war and how they have to sort of assign themselves almost a male role in order to be accepted as that warrior. And when it goes wrong, then it's because they're a woman, rather than if it goes right, it's because they have very manly qualities. Actually, that leads on to my next one, of why is it that you think that women have often found themselves on the wrong side of the law throughout history? Should we go to start with Victoria? Should we go with you first?
Okay, I think often, the society they were set up for, they were so penned in by it that there was, unless you kept the train on the tracks in a very narrow fashion, you were stepping outside the law. But I do think there were, particularly with certain crimes, the way in which a woman had to live her life in those days meant that it was very easy to step on the wrong side of the law. And if you wanted to campaign for anything, particularly with the suffragettes, you were immediately on the wrong side of the law for asking, can I have a vote? Can I just say something? No, right, you've spoken. Spoken out of turn, off to jail you go. So I think it was much more easy to step onto the wrong side of the law. And although, certain societies, such as, for instance, in Lady Colin Campbell's time, it was very much women are on a pedestal, but the minute that you look around you outside of that pedestal, right, you're off. And nothing is, the things that were said to her and done in court certainly weren't, polite or genteel. And this would have been a male barrister suggesting all these things to her, which, were not in any way seen as something you could talk about publicly, but it was spread all over everywhere.
Almost like law controlling behaviour in a way. Vicky, what was your thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. 100%. I think very much, it's the restrictions and the confines. Absolutely. The minute you sort of decide to sort of subverse those in any way, then it's deemed as sort of an illegal act, literally by the law, because the laws are set up to control you. Exactly what you were saying, Sabrina. It's about control. It's about sort of minimizing the influence and impact that women can have in history, obviously, and that's still a factor today, perhaps not as much as it has been in the past. But unless you were able to feel you were fulfilled and happy and could have, the life that you wanted within those restrictions, anything that blurred those lines would have been seen as a kind of, an attack on the social norms, and you had to be dealt with, by the law. And that's interesting. I think some of the work that we do looks at the relationship between the LGBTQ plus community and the law. And I think it makes me think a little bit about the story of Fanny and Stella, who were both born as males, but presented as women on stage. They dressed in drag, but then the minute they did that off stage, again, it was breaking those kind of social norms. They were arrested for really sort of no evidence, because it wasn't illegal to dress in drag or present as a woman if you were a man, but so the charge was sort of inciting homosexuality, which was illegal at the time. So it's just the minute somebody breaks what is set up in those social sort of confines, then you're deemed as sort of needing to be dealt with by the law. So 100% agree with what Victoria said.
And I'd just add to that as well, the protection that the law offers, as opposed to being a constraint. I think only until recently that women have been sufficiently and adequately protected by the law. So way back when I was learning law and at law school and doing my degree, it was only just the law that a husband could rape his wife. A husband was incapable of rape before that. And this particular law lecturer told us this in a certain manner and said, this shouldn't be the law. And there was a mass walkout from the lecture theatre. But, you know, just to put it in context, I am only 50 years old. It's not like this happened,
Yeah.
you know, 100 years ago. This was in living memory, that women, it was still perfectly acceptable. You could not bring a rape case against your husband.
So hard to wrap, you know, to wrap your head around it in, you know, today now.
I mean, my own sort of personal observation is that generally, even today, I think that women in high-profile leadership roles are put under more scrutiny, I think, than their male counterparts. I do think, obviously, these roles are under scrutiny anyway, but I do think it's a sort of a higher level of scrutiny when it's a female in that role. I don't know if you find that, or
it's the type of scrutiny as well. How they look, how they dress, how they speak. Like the voice, there's a whole thing about how Margaret Thatcher had to change her voice in order to take on that leadership role. Whereas men don't get that kind of scrutiny. They can talk how they like.
I think it's in the I think it's done in such subtle ways as well. It's done in a way that many of us, you know, and I would consider myself to be sort of quite aware of when things like that are happening, or you at least try to be, but it's done so subtly and it's so ingrained in sort of the language that maybe media uses that sometimes you don't even recognize it, you don't even see it. And that's sort of, for me, sort of one of the biggest issues. It's like, okay, yeah, hold on, I just accepted that, you know, they've put a description of a female politician was saying, was what she was wearing. Whereas, you know, in the next sentence, they may be describing her male colleague and not a mention of what they're wearing. But it can be done quite subtly as well. So, yeah, this sort of the scrutiny is certainly, I think, there and different and elevated perhaps for women, but yeah, in those areas, but it can be done so subtly we don't really even notice it.
I think probably crime writer's the only occupation you can have where it doesn't matter. And no one really knows unless you use, you know, a female name or whatever. They don't care, you know. Many of the great crime writers are female.
We've been talking a lot about society and their view on women and how they represent us. So how do you think history and we as a society should remember these women, some of these women that we've talked about? Do you think there should be like a shift in how we're looking at them compared to how they were? Vicky?
I think it's about having the conversation and discussing it. I think it's not about changing facts or changing history, but actually who's written this history and from what perspective. Sort of your classic GCSE history sort of key skill, like who's written this bit of evidence, you know, who's written this article, or whose perspective are we actually seeing here. And I guess historically, you know, those histories are often written not by women. So it's just about saying, let's just look at this again and just have a think about what angle we're coming from here and discuss it. You know, you may come to the conclusion, no, actually, that is the right view to take. But I think it's important to really start to look at it and also to think about the histories of women that aren't being told. So, you know, ordinary everyday women, again, for us looking in and around Covent Garden, you know, Covent Garden would have been packed with women in all kinds of professions, doing all kinds of jobs, in all kinds of roles, representing, you know, mother, business owner, you know, all of those kind of things, but they're just simply not talked about. It's not captured. So again, just trying to go back and find the evidence, look at, well, where can we find stories of these women and how can we present them? But I think just talking and discussing them and highlighting them is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, brilliant. Victoria?
Yeah, completely. I would agree. You know, I think there's been a lot on the suffragettes and the high profile suffragettes. But for instance, you know, there were quite a lot sort of on the ground level, and you know, ordinary people and their lives and what they had to live, and particularly people who didn't have a lot of money as well. I think, you know, their stories need to be told, and we need to learn from them as well, you know, and think it's not okay for young women to have to walk along the street and feel afraid all the time, and my first thing that I was given when I went to college was a rape alarm, and and a t-shirt that said no means no, and I kind of thought, what have I stepped into here, and that is how women feel a lot of the time. What have I stepped into here? And you're on alert a lot of the time as, am I potentially a victim of crime? Am I just a walking victim of crime? But I think, remembering these great women from history and where they stood on either side of the law, when they were judged to have stood on which side of the law, just keep telling their stories, and, not in a revisionist way, but I think, with the eyes of today, so that we can see, exactly how these women were treated, how they managed to get themselves out of these positions as well. So, for instance, with Lady Colin Campbell, okay, she was shunned by all of her society, but decided, I'm an intelligent woman, I can do this, I can write. And one of the few things that has always been open to a woman, way back to the Brontes' time, is, you can put a pen on a piece of paper and you can write a book. And it is a great way of escaping any kind of society, is to write about it, and quite scathingly a lot of the time as well. I think Lady Colin Campbell shone a light on many things. She was one of the first female journalists to write about a boxing match, and that was at the turn of the century. So I think, writing is definitely a way to remember them for what they were as well.
Yeah, I think also sort of talking about sort of shifting and sort of talking about like to end those stories that haven't been told. I think a good example is the Book of the Five, of the women of the victims of Jack the Ripper, because they've always been seen as just these sort of figures that never really knew anything about, just Jack the Ripper's victims. But then I think that was long overdue to actually show people that actually they were human beings, and they had lives, and they had children, they had lives before they got to that situation. So I think that sort of thing is definitely be important to going forward, to make sure that those gaps and sort of gaps in the research and gaps in sort of the stories actually are filled in.
And about choices as well. I would often get ladies who were my defendants, and the assumption was this person had chosen a louche lifestyle and a degrading situation to find herself in, whereas in fact, it was forced upon them, and these people, whether they were involved in drug dealing or any number of things, that they'd ended up in court. It wasn't something where they put down, on their school careers form, I want to end up in court as, a drugs mule, where I've taken a huge risk, and now, I'm going to find myself going to prison. It's often not a choice situation.
Just going back to the whole perception things, and it's sort of how society sees women in particular situations, isn't it, really? So well, thank you very much for joining us today. That's been absolutely fascinating. I've been really enjoying that, so I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Do you want to just give your websites again, so where people can find a bit more about you, about your work as well? So, Victoria, do you want to do yours?
I'm victoriadowd.com.
Okay, cool.
You can find out about my books there, and also the Adapting Agatha series is all on there on the blog section as well.
Cool. And your books are available on Amazon and other sort of books?
They are, Waterstones, the Good Indies, etc.
Great, brilliant, thank you.
Vicky? I'm gonna go and purchase some. I'm gonna get my Amazon inbox full.
Thank you very much.
But thanks. So our website is bowstreetpolicemuseum.org.uk. Actually, you mentioned The Five by Hallie Rubenhole. We have a talk with Hallie coming up in April. And that's actually going to take place in what was the original Court 1 of the Magistrates' Court. So where a lot of those cases that we've talked about today actually took place. So all details for that are on our website as well.
You also have a newsletter, don't you, as well, people can subscribe to?
Yeah. So you can be sort of first to know about all of these events and what we're up to. Just jump onto our website. You'll find the link to sign up there.
Yeah, and I also say that I've been you do sort of live stream your talks as well, don't you?
We do, yeah.
So I've sort of done that as well. And even going to in person though, I think the prices are really reasonable. So definitely if you can sort of sign up to the newsletter and go and watch these talks, and definitely recommend those.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening, and see you next month.
You have been listening to the Bow Street Society podcast. It was written and presented by T.G. Campbell and Richard A. Boxshall.
Special thanks to all the contributors, including Sabrina Poole, Phil Rowe and Jaden Brandliff.
You can find out more about the Bow Street Society series by T.G. Campbell at bowstreetsociety.com. You can also find out more through social media. Search for Bow Street Society on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube.
Thank you for listening.
All podcast content is the intellectual property of T.G. Campbell.